At the beginning of the story, seen a young man named Chan. Every day, Chan sells steamed buns near the high school, until one day there was a grandmother and her granddaughter who had bought the bread sold by Chan. It is known that the granddaughter of this granny named Susan, who will soon graduate from school. It seemed that Chan kept looking at Susan, because it turned out that Chan fell in love at first sight with Susan. The granny herself was annoyed with Chan, because Chan kept looking at her granddaughter. Since then, Chan always took the time to see his idol in the neighborhood where Susan went to school. Until one night, Chan accidentally saw the granny who was looking for Susan because she hadn't come home since noon. Knowing this, Chan took the initiative to look for her around the village. After a long searching, Chan finally found Susan, who was lost near the hill. Chan immediately brought Susan back to her granny. It turned out that Susan was mentally disabled, so she often forgot her way home and behaved a little strangely. However, Chan did not care about that, because he really loved Susan. A few days later, Chan never saw Susan and her granny. He became curious about what was happening to them. Until after finishing selling, Chan took the initiative to go to Susan's house. But here Chan was surprised, because in front of Susan's house was filled with many people, including the police and social services. It turned out that Susan's grandmother had been dead for 3 days, and Susan was just lying next to her granny's body. Therefore, everyone assumed that Susan's mental health was getting worse and was considered insane. So Susan was considered to be taken to a mental hospital. Later that evening, Chan was seen secretly visiting the hospital where Susan was being treated. Luckily, Susan's hospital room was at the back of the hospital, so Chan could easily take Susan away from the hospital. Later, Chan took Susan to a playground to calm her down. It was revealed that Susan also had feelings for Chan. After a little calm, Chan also drove Susan to Susan's apartment. But unfortunately, when he got there, the apartment was still padlocked by the police. When Chan wanted to break down the door, suddenly a woman who was Susan's apartment neighbor came out. It is known that this woman felt sorry for Susan, then immediately invited Susan to enter her room. Once inside, the woman said that she would be away for a few days, and while she was gone, Susan and Chan could stay in her apartment. It was revealed that the woman was a prostitute who often wandered off. She even allowed Chan to do whatever he wanted after she left. Chan accidentally saw Susan taking a bath, but Chan, the pious one, he didn't think anything dirty and instead chose to go out to look for food around the apartment. However, this is where all the brutality would begin. A few minutes after Chan left, Susan was seen who had just finished taking a bath. At the same time, there was a sudden knock on the door. Susan, who thought that it was Chan, immediately opened the door, but it turned out that what came was an unknown man named David. After forcing his way in, David immediately took out some money, because he thought Susan was a new prostitute, a subordinate of the woman who was leaving. Then, David immediately revealed his depravity to Susan, even though at that time Susan looked so scared. Fortunately, Chan, who was across the street from the apartment, had seen David from the window. Chan immediately returned, then without hesitation beat David. In the end, Chan and Susan managed to escape from the apartment. Then they both decided to report to the local police about what David had done. Here, we are introduced to the deputy chief of police named Jeffo. Jeffo asks Chan to go to the next room, while he and some of his men will try to interrogate Susan. One of the old policemen who knew that Susan was mentally disabled told them not to bother with the case. Later, Jeffo and his men tried to ask about the characteristics of the perpetrator who harassed Susan. Susan said that the perpetrator was a man who had a star tattoo on his right hand, but after being explained in detail, they looked shocked. That's because it turns out that the culprit is David, who is the chief of police, as well as their superior. David was also seen who was already at the police station and had heard what Susan was saying. Then David told all his subordinates, including Jeffo, to gather. Here David said that he thought Susan was a woman of restitude, so he without hesitation tried to enjoin her. But since this had already happened, David now asked everyone to shut up, because he would slander Chan, as if Chan was the culprit. 30 minutes later, David's men tried to corner Chan with some questions. until Chan accidentally saw David's photo on the table. At once, Chan realized that the police must have intended to trap him. Swiftly, Chan tried to escape by bringing Susan, but unfortunately Chan was unsuccessful, then tortured by them. To make matters worse, the police officers even raped Susan in turn, right in front of Chan's eyes. They seemed very satisfied with what they had done. One of them even did this to Susan twice. After that, they began to create a scenario by pretending that Chan had grabbed a police gun, that the gun was attached to Chan's hand, who was now unconscious. As for Susan, she was also threatened. If Susan dared to open her mouth, then they would not hesitate to finish Chan in prison. Then during the trial, the police officers gave false testimony according to their previous plan. Until in the end, Chan had to stay in prison for 6 months because he was considered to have attacked the authorities. During his time in prison, Chan was seen trying to erase his fingerprints. Of course, Chan is planning something when he is released later. Long story short, 6 months later, Chan was finally released from prison. When Chan was about to leave, he was waiting for Susan. But Chan cried when he saw Susan because it turned out that Susan was now pregnant, which was the result of the actions of the police officers. Of course, everyone would also be very hurt if they were in Chan or Susan's position. Susan herself was still trying to smile so that Chan could forget about the past few days. After that, they both looked a little happy because now they could be together again. But of course, the grudge in the past could not just disappear in Chan's heart, and Chan will definitely avenge the police officers. One day showed a pregnant woman who was shopping. It was known that the woman was the wife of one of the police officers, David's men. After finishing shopping, she immediately returned home. Not long after, her husband Tingzai also returned home and immediately called his wife. But at the same time, she was suddenly attacked by a man. Chan attacked her from behind. A few days later, a team of divers from the police found a plastic bag with a very foul odor. On reports from residents, the bag was taken to the police station for identification. When the bag was opened, they were shocked to find that it contained a crushed baby fetus. Inside, the police also found the identity card of Tingzai, their own colleague. Knowing this, they quickly went to Tingzai's house. Arriving there, the police did not find Tingzai's whereabouts. Until shortly, they were shocked again when they saw Tingzai's dead wife in a decomposed stomach without a fetus. This means that the plastic bag found in the river was Tingzai's baby fetus. At the same time, it showed an old policeman who had just finished traveling with his young pregnant wife. It is known that this old policeman is also part of the perpetrators who had raped Susan. When the old policeman wanted to bring drinks, he was frightened when he saw his wife who was staring at the window. 30 minutes after that, the old policeman tried to contact one of his police colleagues, but when picked up, the old policeman did not say anything, so his colleague assumed that something must be wrong happened. In a short time, his colleagues in the police came to the old policeman's house. However, they were shocked to see the old policeman's dead wife with her stomach cut open, just like in the previous case. Then, they also saw the dead old policeman in the hot tub. Here, Jeffo suspected that the perpetrator of all these incidents might be Chan, who wanted revenge against them. Later, news of the serial killings with the police officers as victims went viral on national TV. The authorities tried to find the perpetrator by tracking every vehicle that left and entered their city. Soon after, the bus Chan was traveling in was also stopped by the authorities. Chan, who was afraid that Jeffo was already suspicious of him, chose to run away secretly. Unfortunately, Chan was caught by Jeffo and a chase ensued. Eventually, Chan was captured and taken to an interrogation room. Here, Chan was tortured by Jeffo and one of his men, so that Chan would confess to everything he had done to their colleagues. However, Chan chose to remain silent, so they continued to torture Chan. Annoyed that Chan still wouldn't confess, Jeffo wanted to shoot Chan in the head. However, Chan still didn't want to say anything. On the other hand, Susan, who was at home, she accidentally saw the news on TV, which reported that Chan was now arrested on charges of murder to police officers and also his family. Knowing this, Susan was certainly disappointed in Chan, because indirectly she would part again with her lover. Later, Susan contacted the police. and after connecting, for some reason Susan dropped the phone. Then Susan went into the bathroom, because it turned out that Susan intended to abort the fetus in her own stomach using a knife. After that, Susan was seen throwing the knife into the water channel. A few minutes later, the scene returned to the police station, and at that time, Jeffo was really going to finish off Chan. However, a police captain from the headquarters suddenly came to Jeffo with angry. Here, the captain said that Jeffo had arrested the wrong person, because the perpetrator of the serial killer had just now committed the act on a pregnant woman, that is, Susan. This meant that Susan had intentionally done this, so that Chan could be cleared of all charges. After that, the captain thought that Jeffo and his men had broken the rules. He immediately suspended them. Then the captain tried to ask Chan why he had run away from the bus during the police raid. Chan replied that it was not the first time he had been framed by police officers. Hearing this, plus the lack of evidence, Chan was finally acquitted of all charges. On the other hand, Jeffo's men suggested to Jeffo that they tell the police captain the truth, which was about Chan having a grudge against them for past events. Hearing this, Jeffo of course refused, because if they confessed, it was the same as humiliating their own pride. Then the two of them tried to contact David, the police chief who was now retired. Jeffo told David that they planned to finish off Chan and Susan as soon as possible. It turned out that Chan planned to take Susan away from the hospital before the police officers did anything to them. However, when Chan and Susan were just about to leave, they were caught by Jeffo. Then a chase ensued. Behind that, Jeffo's men were immediately asked to intercept the ambulance that was being taken away by Chan. On one occasion, Jeffo's men managed to find the car and immediately shot at Chan until his car crashed into a mini fuel station. Then there was a scuffle between the two of them. Shortly after that, Jeffo suddenly arrived and immediately intended to crash his car into Chan. Fortunately, Chan managed to dodge, so there was another chase. In the end, Chan was caught and was immediately beaten to a pulp by Jeffo. While cornered, Chan accidentally found an iron plate. Then, without hesitation, Chan beat Jeffo to a pulp and died. The next day, David, the former police chief who is now retired, managed to find Susan in an ambulance. Without thinking, David immediately shot Susan, who was still lying limp. Then, David tried to provoke Chan by firing his gun upwards. Hearing the sound of gunfire, Chan, who had apparently fainted last night, immediately woke up. While staggering, Chan tried to get closer to David. David, who wanted to finish everything immediately, tried to immediately finish Chan with his gun until he ran out of bullets. Then David said if Chan later can survive to live, then meet him. The scene moves to 5 years after that. David is seen daydreaming because it turns out that he is always haunted by guilt for his sins against Susan and Chan. It is known that David also now lives in another city and devotes himself to teaching at a school. Not only that, David also now often appears on national TV as a religious and charity volunteer. On the other hand, it turned out that Chan was still alive, and he accidentally saw a TV broadcast that was showing David. Therefore, Chan finally knew David's location, and he will still finish his unclosed grudge. Before going to see David, Chan shaved his hair like before. Long story short, Chan came to David, who was teaching children to play the piano. When David saw Chan, he tried to invite Chan to drink coffee, while talking casually. Here, David said that revenge was not good, and he asked Chan to forgive all of David's mistakes. However, Chan, who had been possessed by a grudge since 5 years ago, did not hesitate to kill David on the spot. The end of the movie shows Chan continuing his life with Susan. It turns out that Susan is still alive, although now she has to use a wheelchair because David once shot her leg. And after that, the movie ended.